The morning sun cast long shadows across the gleaming marble floor of the Goldcrest Hotel as Anthony made his way through the revolving doors. He straightened his navy blue blazer and adjusted his glasses, taking a moment to appreciate the grand chandelier hanging above the lobby. This was his big chance, a meeting with potential clients who could commission his architectural firm for their new office building. At 25, Anthony had already overcome numerous obstacles to earn his position at one of the city's respected architectural firms. Today's presentation had kept him up late for weeks, perfecting every detail, anticipating every question. He'd arrived 30 minutes early to set up and calm his nerves before the clients arrived. The lobby buzzed with activity. Business people hurried past with laptop bags and coffee cups. Tourists milled about, taking photos of the ornate ceiling designs, ironically, the kind of detail work Anthony had specialized in during his final year of architecture school. He approached the front desk with confident steps, portfolio case in hand. 3 hotel staff members stood behind the counter, 2 younger employees helping guests check in, and an older woman with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun, watching over operations with hawk-like attention. "Good morning," Anthony said with a warm smile. "I'm here for a meeting in the Oakwood conference room at 10:30. Could you point me in the right direction?" The older woman, whose name tag read Ms. Fletcher, hotel manager, looked up from her computer. Her eyes traveled from Anthony's face to his casual but professional outfit, dark jeans, button-up shirt, and blazer. Something in her expression shifted, hardening almost imperceptibly. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice cooler than the air conditioning. "Yes, I'm meeting with the representatives from Westfield Development. I'm the architect they're consulting with about their new project," Anthony explained, still maintaining his professional demeanor despite noticing the change in her tone. Ms. Fletcher raised an eyebrow. "I'll need to see some ID and proof of your appointment." Anthony glanced around, noticing others walking freely toward the conference areas without being stopped. Just moments before, a group of 3 people had walked past the desk without so much as a nod from the staff. "Of course," he said calmly, though he felt his heart rate quicken. He'd been in this situation before, the quiet questioning of whether he belonged in certain spaces. He pulled out his driver's license and opened his email app to show the meeting confirmation. Ms. Fletcher examined his license with unusual scrutiny, looking back and forth between his face and the photo several times. She barely glanced at the email confirmation. "What did you say the company name was again?" she asked, despite the email clearly showing the Westfield Development logo at the top. "Westfield Development," Anthony repeated patiently. "I'm presenting designs for their new headquarters." While they were talking, another man around Anthony's age walked up to the second receptionist, mentioned he was heading to a meeting, and was immediately given directions with a smile. No ID request, no verification needed. "I'm not seeing any Westfield meeting in our system," Ms. Fletcher said, though she hadn't typed anything into her computer since their conversation began. Anthony took a deep breath. It was confirmed last week. The Oakwood room at 10:30. "My clients will be arriving soon, and I need to set up my presentation." "The conference rooms are for registered guests and approved business partners only," Ms. Fletcher said firmly. "I can't just let anyone wander around the hotel." A few heads turned in the lobby. Anthony felt his cheeks warm, not from embarrassment, but from the familiar burn of being singled out. "I'm not anyone," he said quietly but with dignity. "I'm a professional here on legitimate business. My firm has used your conference facilities many times before." Ms. Fletcher crossed her arms. "Without proper verification, I'm going to have to ask you to wait here while I call security to escort you out." Anthony stood his ground, maintaining eye contact. "Please check your system again. The reservation is under Westfield Development. My name is Anthony Jackson, and I'm the lead architect for their project." People were definitely watching now. A hotel guest paused near the water fountain, pretending to drink while observing the scene. 2 business people whispered to each other by the elevator. Anthony knew this moment well, the public questioning of his right to occupy a space where he was invited, qualified, and belonged. Anthony took a deep breath, determined to handle the situation with the professionalism he'd always prided himself on. "Ms. Fletcher," he said, lowering his voice to prevent the growing audience from hearing every word. I understand you have security protocols, but I'm noticing that other people are walking to the conference area without being questioned. I've shown you my ID and my meeting confirmation. Could you please explain why that's not enough?" Ms. Fletcher's lips thinned into a tight line. She glanced around, becoming aware of the attention they were drawing. Several guests had slowed their pace across the lobby, watching the interaction with barely concealed interest. "We have different protocols for different situations," she said stiffly. "I'm just doing my job." "Different protocols based on what exactly?" Anthony asked, his voice calm but firm. He placed both hands flat on the counter, his portfolio case leaning against his leg. Years of similar experiences had taught him to remain composed, even as frustration built inside him like a pressure cooker. A man in a business suit walked past them, nodding briefly at Ms. Fletcher before heading toward the conference rooms without a word being exchanged. The double standard couldn't have been more obvious if it had been written on the wall in neon letters. "I don't appreciate your tone," Ms. Fletcher said, her voice rising slightly. "If you're here legitimately, you shouldn't have a problem with our verification process." Anthony noticed one of the younger desk clerks glance uncomfortably between him and Ms. Fletcher. The young woman looked like she wanted to say something but remained silent. "My tone has been nothing but professional," Anthony replied evenly. "I'm simply asking to be treated with the same respect as everyone else who walks through those doors." He gestured toward the hallway, where at least 4 people had passed unchallenged in the last few minutes. A small crowd had gathered now. An elderly couple whispered to each other by the seating area. 2 businesswomen had paused their conversation to watch. Anthony felt each pair of eyes like a physical weight. This was supposed to be his moment to shine professionally, not another battle against prejudice. "Look, I don't make the rules," Ms. Fletcher said defensively, though no one had mentioned any actual hotel policy. "People visitors who aren't clearly here for business purposes need to be verified." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "People like me. What exactly does that mean, Ms. Fletcher?" The tension in the air thickened. Another hotel employee, a man in his 30s with a manager badge, noticed the commotion and began walking over. Ms. Fletcher's cheeks flushed. "That's not what I meant. Don't twist my words. I meant people who aren't regular guests or known business partners." "I showed you confirmation that I'm here for a scheduled meeting," Anthony said. "My firm has used these conference rooms before. What more verification do you need?" Ms. Fletcher reached for the phone at her desk. "If you're going to be difficult, I'll need to call security." The threat hung in the air between them. Anthony felt a familiar mixture of emotions: frustration at facing yet another barrier, determination not to let it stop him, and calculation about how to handle the situation without escalating it further. He couldn't afford to miss this meeting, but he also wouldn't accept being treated unfairly. "I'm not being difficult," he said. "I'm trying to get to my meeting on time. My clients will be here any minute." As if on cue, the revolving doors turned, and 3 people in business attire entered the lobby. Anthony recognized the lead client, Mr. Richardson from Westfield Development. Relief washed over him briefly before a new concern took its place. Would his potential clients witness him being treated like an intruder? Mr. Richardson spotted Anthony and smiled, waving as he approached. "Anthony, good to see you're early too. We're excited about seeing those designs." Ms. Fletcher's expression changed instantly, her mouth slightly open as she watched the warm greeting between Anthony and the well-dressed businessman. "Mr. Richardson," Anthony said, maintaining his composure despite the circumstances. "Yes, I was just trying to get directions to the Oakwood room to set up my presentation." Mr. Richardson frowned slightly, picking up on the tension. "Is there a problem?" Before Anthony could answer, Ms. Fletcher cut in with a completely different tone than she used moments before. "No problem at all, sir," she said with a forced smile. "I was just about to direct him to the conference room." Anthony watched the transformation with a mixture of vindication and wariness. The sudden shift in treatment now that he'd been validated by someone Ms. Fletcher deemed acceptable was all too familiar. Mr. Richardson looked between them, his eyes narrowing slightly as he picked up on what had happened. "Good," he said carefully, "because we've been looking forward to this presentation for weeks. Anthony's firm comes highly recommended." Ms. Fletcher's smile didn't reach her eyes as she gestured toward the hallway. The Oakwood room is down this corridor to the left. Would you like me to have someone show you the way? The sudden shift in her attitude made Anthony's stomach tighten. Just moments ago, she'd been ready to call security. Now she was offering an escort service. I think we can find it, Mr. Richardson said, his tone carrying a slight edge that suggested he pieced together what had happened. Anthony, shall we? Anthony nodded, gathering his portfolio case. As he turned to join Mr. Richardson and the other clients, he noticed the young desk clerk watching him with an apologetic expression. At least someone recognized the unfairness of the situation. They hadn't made it 10 steps when a uniformed security guard appeared, heading straight toward them. Ms. Fletcher must have called security before Anthony's clients arrived. Excuse me, sir, the guard said, addressing Anthony directly. I need to verify your business here. The lobby seemed to go quiet. Anthony felt heat rush to his face, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer injustice of it all. Here he was, standing with his clients, still being treated like an intruder. Mr. Richardson stepped forward. This is ridiculous. He's with us. We have a meeting in the Oakwood room. The security guard looked uncertain, glancing back at Ms. Fletcher, who now hovered nearby, her composure slipping as she realized her mistake. There seems to be a misunderstanding, she said quickly. Everything's fine, Tom. They're all here for the Westfield meeting. But the damage was done. The other hotel guests had witnessed the entire scene. An older woman shook her head disapprovingly at Ms. Fletcher. A group of business people watched with uncomfortable expressions. Anthony felt their eyes on him, some sympathetic, others merely curious, a few deliberately looking away. Anthony straightened his shoulders. Let's proceed to the meeting room, he said to his clients, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. This wasn't the first time he'd faced discrimination, and sadly he knew it wouldn't be the last. As they walked down the corridor, Anthony could hear whispers behind them. His professional moment had been tainted by an all-too-familiar experience. Years of hard work and education, and still, he was judged first by his appearance rather than his credentials. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Richardson said quietly as they walked. That was completely inappropriate. Anthony appreciated the acknowledgement but kept his focus professional. Thank you. Let's concentrate on the presentation. I have some designs I think will really impress you. They entered the Oakwood room, a spacious conference area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Under different circumstances, Anthony would have admired the architecture, perhaps even made mental notes about the design elements. Instead, he found himself going through the motions, setting up his laptop and connecting it to the projector with mechanical precision. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged his materials on the table. The confrontation in the lobby had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Years of similar experiences had taught him to compartmentalize, to push down the emotions and carry on. But each incident left its mark. One of the other clients, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, touched his arm gently. Are you okay? That was awful out there. Anthony managed a small smile. I'm fine. It's unfortunately not uncommon. Well, it's unacceptable, she said firmly. For what it's worth, we're looking forward to your presentation. Your firm's reputation precedes you. Her words helped center him. This was what mattered. His work, his talent, his professionalism. He wouldn't let Ms. Fletcher's prejudice derail this opportunity. As Anthony began setting up his presentation slides, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, focused on preparing. But when it buzzed again immediately, he pulled it out to check. It was his mother. Normally, he would wait until after the meeting to call back, but something told him to at least check a message. We'll be at the hotel in 20 minutes. Want to meet for coffee after your presentation. Love you. Anthony stared at the message, a strange feeling washing over him. His mother had mentioned she had a business meeting in the city today, but hadn't said where. Why was she coming to this hotel? He texted back quickly, in the middle of client meeting. We'll explain later, but had an issue with hotel staff. Oakwood room if you want to stop by after. Putting his phone away, Anthony took a deep breath and turned to his clients with a professional smile. Shall we begin? As he launched into his presentation, showcasing the designs he'd worked on for weeks, Anthony pushed the lobby incident to the back of his mind. He didn't know then that his mother's arrival would soon turn this humiliating experience into something entirely different. Anthony was halfway through his presentation when his phone vibrated in his pocket again. He normally would never check messages during a client meeting, but after the morning's events, he felt on edge. Excusing himself briefly, he glanced at the screen. Another text from his mother. In the hotel lobby now. Something doesn't feel right here. Several staff members look nervous. What happened exactly? Anthony's heart raced. He texted back quickly. Finish in 15 minutes. Wait for me if you can. Returning his attention to the clients, Anthony continued discussing the innovative features of his design. Mr. Richardson and his team seemed genuinely impressed, asking thoughtful questions about the sustainable elements and accessibility features. Despite the earlier unpleasantness, the meeting itself was going well. Just as Anthony was showing the final rendering, a beautiful 3D model of the proposed building with its distinctive glass atrium, his phone rang loudly. It wasn't just any ring, but the special tone he'd set for family emergencies. "I'm so sorry," he said to the clients, embarrassment washing over him. "I never take calls during meetings, but this might be important." Mr. Richardson nodded understandingly. "Go ahead. We could use a 5-minute break anyway." Anthony stepped into the corner of the room and answered, "Mom, everything okay?" His mother's voice came through, calm, but with an edge he recognized from childhood, the tone she used when someone had crossed a line with her family. "Anthony, I'm in the lobby. A young woman from the reception desk just approached me. She overheard what happened to you and she's upset about it. Says it isn't the first time the manager has done this." Anthony closed his eyes briefly. "Mom, I'm handling it. I'm in the middle of my presentation. I understand that, and I'm proud of you for keeping your composure. But this isn't right, and it shouldn't be brushed under the rug." Her voice had that determined quality that Anthony knew all too well. This young woman, her name tag says Lily, she wants to talk to somebody about what she's witnessed over the past few months. Anthony sighed. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to speak with this manager." "What's her name?" "Ms. Fletcher, but Mom." "Fletcher," his mother repeated, and he could almost picture her writing it down. "Finish your meeting. Do your job brilliantly like you always do. I'll take care of this." Something in her tone made Anthony pause. "Mom, why are you at this hotel anyway? You just said you had a meeting downtown today." There was a brief silence. "We'll talk about that when you're done. Focus on your clients now." The call ended, leaving Anthony with a strange feeling. His mother, Dr. Patricia Johnson, wasn't just any mom. As the head of a major consulting firm specializing in corporate culture and ethics, she had built a reputation for transforming toxic workplaces. But why was she here, at this specific hotel, today of all days? Anthony returned to the table, apologizing to his clients. "Family matter. Where were we?" Mr. Richardson smiled. "You were just explaining the sustainability features of the atrium design. But before you continue, I wanted to say that we're all very impressed so far. And I also want to apologize again for the reception you received when we arrived." The female client nodded in agreement. It was completely unprofessional. "Have you encountered that kind of treatment here before?" Anthony hesitated, unsure how much to share. Let's just say it wasn't entirely surprising. "Well, it surprised me," Mr. Richardson said firmly. "And I'll be speaking to hotel management about it. We've used this venue for meetings for years, but if this is how they treat professionals, we may need to reconsider." Anthony felt a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. While he appreciated the support, he'd learned from experience that allies sometimes disappeared when standing up meant putting themselves at risk. "I appreciate that," he said carefully. "Now, about the atrium design." A commotion outside the conference room interrupted him. Raised voices could be heard from the direction of the lobby, one of them sounding remarkably like his mother's. The door to the Oakwood room was partially open, and through it, Anthony could see hotel staff hurrying past. Mr. Richardson raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like something's happening out there." Anthony had a sinking feeling he knew exactly what, or rather who, was causing the stir. His mother had never been one to let injustice slide, especially when it came to her son. "Perhaps we should take a short break," he suggested, trying to keep his voice level. "I need to check on something quickly." As Anthony stepped into the hallway, he could hear his mother's voice clearly now, calm but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who would not be dismissed or ignored. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Fletcher immediately. And no, it cannot wait." Anthony hurried down the hallway toward the lobby, his heart racing. He knew that tone in his mother's voice all too well, calm on the surface, but with an undercurrent of steel that had intimidated everyone from his childhood bullies to corporate executives. As he rounded the corner, the scene that greeted him confirmed his suspicions. His mother, Dr. Patricia Johnson, stood tall in her perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Even from a distance, Anthony could see she was in full professional mode. Hotel staff hovered nervously nearby, including the young desk clerk who had seemed uncomfortable during Anthony's earlier confrontation. "I've asked to speak with Ms. Fletcher 3 times now," Dr. Johnson was saying to a nervous-looking man with an assistant manager badge. "And 3 times I've been told she's unavailable. I find that difficult to believe." The assistant manager swallowed visibly. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but—" "Doctor," she corrected him firmly. "Dr. Johnson, and this isn't frustration. This is a professional inquiry into a disturbing incident involving discrimination against a guest who happens to be my son." Anthony approached cautiously. "Mom, my meeting." Dr. Johnson turned, her expression softening momentarily as she saw him. "Anthony, I'm sorry to interrupt your work. Did your presentation go well? We're on a break. The clients are still in the conference room." He lowered his voice. "What's going on here?" Before she could answer, the lobby doors opened and a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by 2 assistants carrying tablets. He scanned the room, spotted Dr. Johnson, and headed straight for her. "Patricia, perfect timing. I was just about to call you." Anthony watched in confusion as his mother greeted the man with a professional handshake. "Robert, good to see you. I'm afraid we have a situation that needs addressing before our meeting." Robert glanced between mother and son, his brow furrowing. What kind of situation? Ms. Fletcher chose that moment to emerge from a side office, clearly unaware of what awaited her. When she spotted the growing crowd in the lobby, she froze momentarily before composing herself and approaching with a practiced smile. "Mr. Harrington, we weren't expecting you until 11, she said to Robert, completely ignoring Dr. Johnson and Anthony. "The boardroom is ready for your meeting." Robert nodded. "Thank you, but it seems we have something to discuss first. Have you met Dr. Johnson? She's the consultant I told you about." Ms. Fletcher's smile faltered as she turned to look at Dr. Johnson more carefully. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, followed by the first hint of alarm. "We haven't been formally introduced," Dr. Johnson said coolly. "Though I understand you've already met my son, Anthony." The color drained from Ms. Fletcher's face as she looked between Anthony and his mother. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Robert looked confused. "Is there a problem?" "Perhaps Ms. Fletcher would like to explain," Dr. Johnson suggested, her voice deceptively calm. "About the hotel's selective verification process for guests." Ms. Fletcher's composure cracked visibly. "There's been a misunderstanding. We have strict security protocols, which apparently only apply to certain guests," Anthony said quietly. The young desk clerk, Lily according to her name tag, stepped forward nervously. "It's not the first time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Fletcher has a pattern of singling out certain people." The silence that followed was heavy. Hotel guests paused to watch the scene unfold. Staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Robert turned to Ms. Fletcher, his expression hardening. "Is this true?" I was just following procedure," Ms. Fletcher stammered, but her excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Interesting," Robert said. "Because as CEO of Goldcrest International, I'd be very familiar with any procedure that involves discriminatory treatment of our guests." Anthony blinked in surprise. "CEO?" He looked at his mother, who gave him a small nod of confirmation. "That's what I was coming to tell you after your meeting," she explained quietly. "Goldcrest hired my firm 3 months ago to assess their corporate culture across all properties. Today was my first site visit to this location. Robert asked me to come personally because they're implementing new inclusion initiatives across the chain." The pieces clicked into place. His mother wasn't just any consultant, she was here officially, hired by the parent company that owned this hotel, and she had witnessed firsthand the exact problem she'd been brought in to address. Ms. Fletcher seemed to shrink before their eyes as she realized the full magnitude of her situation. "Mr. Harrington, I can explain." "I sincerely hope so," Robert said, his voice stern. "Because based on what I'm hearing and what these witnesses are describing, you have violated not only our company policies but potentially the law." Anthony stood in stunned silence. What had begun as yet another demoralizing experience of discrimination had turned into something entirely unexpected. For once, there would be real consequences. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the usual hotel background noise, the soft music, the distant sound of elevators, the quiet conversations, seemed to have paused as everyone watched the scene unfold. Ms. Fletcher's face had turned an unhealthy shade of pale, her hands fidgeting with her blazer buttons. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," Robert suggested, his voice firm but measured. "I think not," Dr. Johnson replied, her tone equally controlled. "Discrimination thrives in private spaces. It needs to be addressed openly." Anthony stood beside his mother, a mix of emotions washing through him. There was the familiar weight of being singled out and humiliated, but now also a rising sense of vindication. For once, someone with actual power was witnessing what he experienced regularly. Robert nodded, seeming to understand. "You're right, of course." He turned to Ms. Fletcher. "Please explain yourself." Ms. Fletcher's composure was crumbling by the second. "Mr. Harrington, there's been a misunderstanding. I was only following security protocols." "Which protocols specifically?" Dr. Johnson interrupted. "Because I've reviewed the Goldcrest Employee Handbook thoroughly as part of my consultancy, and there's nothing in there about singling out certain guests for extra verification while allowing others to pass freely." Lily, the young desk clerk, stepped forward again, her voice stronger now. "She does this all the time, sir. Young men of color, especially if they're dressed casually, always get questioned. Sometimes she even makes up excuses about rooms being unavailable." Another staff member, an older bellhop, nodded in agreement. "I've seen it too. Been here 15 years and never felt right about it, but," he trailed off, the unspoken fear of losing his job hanging in the air. Ms. Fletcher's face flushed with anger. "These accusations are completely unfounded. I've been in hospitality for 20 years. I know how to spot people who don't belong in an establishment like this." The words hung in the air, damning in their implication. Robert's expression hardened visibly. "People who don't belong," he repeated slowly. "And how exactly do you identify these people, Miss Fletcher?" She seemed to realize her mistake too late. "That's not what I meant." "I think it's exactly what you meant," Dr. Johnson said quietly. "And it's precisely the attitude my firm was hired to address." The clients from Anthony's meeting had emerged from the conference room, drawn by the commotion. Mr. Richardson and his colleagues stood watching from the hallway entrance. "Dr. Johnson," Robert said, his decision clearly made, "I believe we found our first case study for the Culture Transformation Project." Anthony's mother nodded, her professional demeanor never slipping even as her eyes held a mother's fierce pride and protection. Indeed, a clear example of how bias becomes institutionalized when left unchecked. She opened her leather portfolio and retrieved a small recorder. "With your permission, Mr. Harrington, I'd like to document this as our baseline. My team will use it to measure progress as we implement the training program." Robert agreed immediately. "Absolutely. Complete transparency." Ms. Fletcher looked between them, panic rising in her eyes. "You can't be serious. One minor incident and you're going to make an example of me. After all my years of service." "This wasn't one incident," Lily said, gaining confidence. "This happens weekly. I've been keeping notes because it made me uncomfortable." The bellhop nodded again. "Many of us have seen it, ma'am. We just didn't know who to tell." Ms. Fletcher's gaze darted around the lobby, looking for allies and finding none. Several other staff members were nodding in agreement with Lily and the bellhop. "My son is a respected architect here for a client meeting," Dr. Johnson said, her voice firm but not unkind. "He was treated like an intruder based solely on his appearance. If this is how you treat professionals with appointments, I can only imagine how you treat other guests." Anthony finally spoke up. All I wanted was directions to the conference room. Instead, I was interrogated, threatened with security, and humiliated in front of colleagues and clients. Mr. Richardson stepped forward from the hallway. We all witnessed it, completely unprofessional and, frankly, disturbing. Robert turned to Ms. Fletcher, his decision clear in his expression. Please gather your personal belongings and report to HR. Your employment with Goldcrest is terminated, effective immediately. The words fell like a gavel in the silent lobby. Ms. Fletcher's mouth opened in protest, but no sound came out. For perhaps the first time, she understood what it felt like to be rendered powerless in a space she thought she controlled. Ms. Fletcher stood frozen for a moment, her world collapsing around her. Then, without another word, she turned and walked stiffly toward the staff area, her shoulders rigid with unspoken anger and disbelief. The lobby remained unusually quiet. Hotel guests who had witnessed the scene whispered among themselves. Staff members exchanged glances, some relieved, others worried about what might change. Robert turned to address the gathered hotel employees. I want to be absolutely clear. What happened today is not what Goldcrest stands for. Not now, not ever. His voice carried across the lobby without shouting. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, whether they're a guest, a visitor, or a colleague. He gestured toward Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson's firm has been brought in to help us become better. This isn't about punishment, it's about growth. About making sure every person who walks through our doors feels welcome. The staff listened intently. Anthony noticed how some nodded in agreement while others looked down, perhaps reflecting on times they'd stayed silent. Starting tomorrow, Robert continued, we'll begin a comprehensive training program on inclusive hospitality. And I want to hear from all of you, anonymous feedback welcome, about other concerns or suggestions you have. Lily raised her hand tentatively. Sir, some of us have ideas already. Things we've wanted to change but didn't feel we could speak up about. Robert smiled. Perfect. You'll be the first person Dr. Johnson meets with. As the impromptu meeting dispersed, hotel operations slowly resumed. Anthony found himself surrounded by his clients, who had witnessed everything. Well, Mr. Richardson said with a low whistle, that was not how I expected our meeting to end. Anthony laughed softly, the tension of the day finally breaking. Me neither. Your mother is quite impressive, the female client commented, watching as Dr. Johnson spoke with Robert and several hotel staff members across the lobby. She always has been, Anthony replied. When I was growing up, she taught me that staying quiet about injustice only allows it to continue. Mr. Richardson clapped him on the shoulder. The presentation was excellent, by the way. Despite the interruptions, we'd like to move forward with your design. The professional validation, coming after the emotional roller coaster of the morning, hit Anthony hard. He maintained his composure, but warmth spread through his chest. Thank you. I'm glad you liked the concept. More than liked it, Mr. Richardson said. It's exactly what we've been looking for. Let's schedule a follow-up next week, at our office this time. The clients departed with handshakes and smiles, leaving Anthony to finally process everything that had happened. He walked over to his mother, who was finishing her conversation with Robert. And we'll start with management training first, she was saying. Then roll out to all staff within the month. Robert nodded, making notes on his tablet. Perfect. He looked up at Anthony's approach. Your son is quite impressive, Dr. Johnson. I caught the end of his presentation earlier. Brilliant design work. Pride flashed across his mother's face. He's always been talented. I'm just glad he finally found people who recognize it. After Robert excused himself to deal with the day's upheaval, mother and son found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the lobby. So, Anthony said, corporate culture consultant, you didn't mention the hotel connection when I told you about my meeting here. His mother smiled. I wanted to see the place with fresh eyes. No preconceptions. She touched his arm gently. I didn't expect to witness what happened to you, though I wish I could say I was surprised. Anthony shook his head. You always did have perfect timing. Not perfect, she said, her voice softening. If it were perfect, you would never have been treated that way in the first place. She gazed around the elegant lobby. But maybe what happened today will help make sure it happens a little less often to someone else. They walked together toward the hotel restaurant, both hungry after the emotional morning. "You know," Anthony said as they settled at a table by the window, "when I was a kid and you came to school to talk to the principal about those boys who were bullying me, I was so embarrassed. I thought you were overreacting." His mother smiled, remembering. "And now I understand." He looked around at the hotel staff, who seemed to be moving with new awareness, some stopping to speak with guests they might have ignored before. Already things felt different. Sometimes the only way to change things is to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. "Especially when it's uncomfortable," his mother corrected gently. "Change never comes from comfortable places." As they ordered lunch, Anthony noticed Lily being introduced to guests as the acting manager for the day. She caught his eye across the room and gave a small, determined nod. One incident wouldn't change everything. Anthony knew that better than most. But today, in this space, something had shifted. A small ripple that might grow into something more.